Gaze reading where the greats drop by. Trendy authors tell us all the who, what, and why. Anyone can listen, cause we're spoiler free. Gaze reading, from Pulitzer stars to book club picks, where the curious minds can get their fix. So you say you're not gay, well that's okay. There's something for everyone. Gaze reading.
Hello and welcome to Gaze Reading. What's the tea? If you are new to Gaze Reading, you can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us over on Instagram at Gaze Reading, and you can find the link to our YouTube channel where you can watch this conversation in the show notes or in our link tree over on Instagram. And without further ado, here is Tea Time. Sarah Leavitt, welcome to Tea Time. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I have Sarah Leavitt here to talk to me about her new book, Something Not Nothing. Calling it a book is not fair. It is a graphic memoir. It is a graphic, poetic meditation on grief.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that.
And none of those words start with T-E or A.
No, but I did my homework. And
of course you did, because you're a professor. I was going to say, so I didn't steal any potential words of yours in describing your book. Sarah, what's the tea?
the tea, okay, you just have to bear with me. So I
Yes.
chose the word true, which I feel like on the surface seems unimaginative because it's a memoir. But I spent some time thinking about the T and the E and the A. And I was thinking about what this book is. It's a collection of short comics that I did in the first 2 years after my partner died. Her name was Dynamo, which was the name she gave herself in the 80s. We can talk about that later if it's relevant. But anyway, she died in 2020. She had a lot of chronic illnesses and she actually had a medically assisted death. And we'd been together for 22 years. So in the first 2 years after her death, I was obviously in a very kind of altered state, especially at the beginning. And so when I was starting to make art about her death, I just instinctively started making, like you said, like these more poetic kind of experimental comics. And so there's a lot of like colors and shapes and fragments of text and stuff. And so the word that kept coming into my mind is true, in the way that it felt to me the truest way to try to convey what it was like, because it's not like I went through a thought process where I was like, more representational narrative work doesn't serve me. It's like I instinctively went for that.
Yeah. No, I love
Yeah.
that because it's true in the sense of honest to yourself.
Yeah.
Being to say a true story, but it was true spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I love that. And spoiler alert, the hero dies. I could not read. Are you familiar with that book?
No.
There's a memoir called, spoiler alert, the hero dies.
Okay. I have to read it.
You can imagine what it's about. Could not read that. So I was concerned when this book was essentially pitched as a version of that sort of story. I like opened it with my eyes squinted. But then I think because of the more poetic, more metaphoric, more artful version of sharing the story made it, I don't want to say easier to read because that isn't true. But when you're reading a 300-page memoir where it's like literally hearing the exact stories of this person's life and their story of losing their partner, like that's a very different experience. And this, you're experiencing a feeling versus reading the words. So I'm grateful that you showcased your true self in an artful way that makes it accessible to people who have a hard time reading about grief.
That's interesting. That's interesting to hear. I've definitely thought about how I felt like there's almost like a book that I didn't write, which is the story of Dynamo's illness. And I talk about it in the introduction, but yeah, like her illness and kind of the details of the end of her life. And I don't think I'll ever write that, but it's not something that I'm happy to talk about it. Not happy.
Sure,
it's not like it's a secret or anything. It's just,
right.
This was about like her death and kind of my survival afterwards. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. It feels very true. So
Thank you.
appreciate the tea. All right. What's your E?
Okay. E is exploration. Yeah. So I say this in the book, but I felt like I was Donna and I, before she died, we talked about like the afterlife for her, right? Was there something after death? Was she going somewhere? What happens after you die? And then I realized I was going into an afterlife as well and
Mm.
people said that to me. They were like, you don't know yet how massively your life is going to change. Like your entire world is going to change. And sure, you'll be grieving, but it's also like you're going to be in this completely new life that you don't know anything about yet. And that
Right.
turned out to be true in a lot of ways. And so I felt when I was making these comics, they were documenting this new world or that I was exploring and coming to know.
Even the simple thing towards the beginning of the story of being in bed by yourself is
Yeah.
is an emotion to explore, is a feeling to explore, is a
Mhm.
exploring the new, I don't want to say new normal because that doesn't feel right, but just the new life, the new afterlife. I've never heard that.
Mhm.
I've never heard it described as an afterlife in that way.
Yeah, it really is. And I remember, I think I read there's a Canadian website that kind of shares stories of people whose partners have had medically assisted deaths. And this woman talking about like how she just had to rebuild herself and figure out who she was without her partner.
Hmm.
And I think like lots of us have experienced that even after a breakup, right? You're like, oh, who am I like not in relation to this other person? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My husband and I just we're a little over 10 years together. And
Congratulations.
thank you. The longer we're together, the more stories like this like really impact me. And I
Mm.
feel for the people that have been with their partners for a very long time. Anyway, what is your A?
Okay, my A, again, like the true, I'm like, is it too obvious? It's art
Oh.
because a really big part of this work was just exploring a new way of making art.
Mm.
So I alluded to that earlier, but the comics that I made, these poetic meditations, as you call them, are totally like they're new to me. I had done a little bit of kind of abstract comics before this, but not to this degree. And I hadn't used watercolors like this before. And what can this ink pen do? What can this brush do? What can these watercolors do? What happens when I when I layer watercolors and colored pencils, and how are these colored pencils different from these ones? No, it's a very kind of physical experience
Mm.
more than previous experiences of art making. So like really there was a way in which I just felt really free to experiment with stuff because it started out really as work for myself. And also when you're in a place of kind of deep emotion, there's a little bit of whatever. I'm just going to do whatever I want. I don't have
Yeah.
anything to lose.
And you
Yeah.
essentially created your own form too.
Yeah, I definitely have influences, but yeah,
Yeah.
I was doing something that was totally new to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or
Mhm.
I find it very interesting because people can make assumptions about a book like this going into it. And it's not Fun Home, right? It's not the
Mm-mm.
sort of linear memoir.
Mhm.
Not that Fun Home is linear, but comparatively,
Mhm.
yeah. Someone else that I recently had tea time with, he made a 3-word phrase describing his book in his 3 letters. And that
Mhm.
like blew my mind. So I just took your 3 words and thought of a 3-word sentence. True explorational art, TEA,
Nice.
in
Thank you.
little phrase.
Yeah, I
And I
like it.
think that's a totally wonderful way of describing something, not nothing.
Thank you.
Um, it seems so silly to ask if this was cathartic because is it ever? But your feelings, was it cathartic?
Yeah, I don't think it's a silly question, and it's funny because I feel like with my first memoir was about my mom dying, and I feel like when people asked me that, I had this kind of defensive response of, "No,
Mm,
there's art therapy and then there's art, and they're totally different. This wasn't cathartic." And I feel less defensive about it now. Sure, yeah, it was cathartic. I think that if I hadn't been able to make this kind of art, then it would have been harder for me.
yeah.
It's one of my main ways that I make sense of the world. And sure, like when it came time to put the book together, there's things that I didn't include because they were too messy and not for anybody else to see, or they just weren't good. So there's definitely, I still think there's a separation between like therapy and art, but absolutely, it was cathartic and just, I'd say like steadying. in a way, like just to have this touchstone that you can come back to. Yeah, and I feel like everybody should have that, whether or not you're gonna put it together and show it to an audience. Like it can make such a difference just to be able to draw and write about something. And
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
It's interesting because I think that asking about whether or not it's cathartic goes back to what you were saying about the book about your mom, in that you are a graphic artist. You are a writer, right? So it is
Mhm,
taking what you do and putting it into practice. I can understand
mhm,
why you could get defensive about it not being cathartic because it's your
mhm,
work, versus if you were a lawyer and then wrote a book about that
mhm.
experience, that might have been cathartic because it
Right,
isn't the work that you are
right.
typically doing. So it's interesting to hear that for this, it was almost a balance of both of those things. And
Mhm,
I think when I said it's almost as though you created your own form, that's what I was imagining in my brain, is like you
mhm,
took this like cathartic art, this art that you were doing for catharsis, and turned it into the work that you normally would do, right? Like, does
mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, like there was less of a barrier or something, or in a way that makes sense to me because this way of making art feels much more me. I
Maybe
in
true.
yeah, like in middle
Yeah.
age, I finally found like a way of making art that feels great to me. I don't know. We all
Amazing.
have our
Yes, listen, just talking about my journey earlier today. I get it. No, that's amazing. So I'm struggling because not only was it obviously a terrible time emotionally for you personally, but also in the world. What a time to go through all of that. So
Mhm.
I imagine as well, again, not to put words in your mouth, but I imagine like between losing Domino, but also COVID and all of the thing, like how did you even manage to get through?
I don't know. I was like, I think, yeah, it was really hard. I think honestly, and I just say this with sincerity, like a lot of it was about having a certain amount of privilege. So
Mhm.
I teach at a university. I had medical leave because that started right before my partner died. So I could afford to take time off and
Yeah.
grieve. And I'm so aware of what it means to not be able to do that. So I honestly think that was part of how I made it through. I also was really fortunate at that time to have a really lovely queer family.
Mm.
These friends who we were each other's COVID bubble. We were all single. We had some like arguments when people started dating, and we had to negotiate, can you date and then
Did they
still be part of our
did
bubble?
they date within the bubble or outside of the bubble?
No, thank God. No, there was
Okay,
none of that. We
okay.
had known each other for too long, but we were all gonna go away somewhere, and then a couple people were like, I'm gonna go see this new lover." And no, you're not. Anyway, I don't know. That was a tangent.
I love it, I
But
love it. We love the drama on Gaze Reading.
yeah, so I was lucky to have these people that had been friends with us for a really long time. They'd been there, like, at the time when my partner died,
Mhm.
and so we stuck together through that time.
Yeah, our queer family is, very important.
Yes, absolutely. We would have been honestly completely lost without them.
Yeah. What was I we were talking about dating. I don't remember. Uh, okay, because we're having our tea party, if you could have a
Mhm.
tea party with anybody in the world, in the universe, dead or alive, who would it be? Fictional or
Oh my god.
non-fictional?
No, it's a real person, and I was so excited about this question because the person that I would have tea with, she's a real person, but she's dead, is Tove Jansson.
Oh,
She created the Moomin Trolls.
I have no
Um,
idea what that is.
okay. Tove Jansson was this amazing she was a Swedish-speaking Finn, so she lived in Finland, but she spoke Swedish, and she was a graphic designer and artist and writer, and she created this series called The Moomin Trolls, and I have a little reference to them in the book, but they're like a series of kids books and also comics that are about these imaginary creatures, the Moomin Trolls and their friends. And then she also wrote fiction. She wrote this incredible book called The Summer Book, which I think should be like everybody should read it because it's the most beautiful book. And she was born in 1914 and she lived into her 80s. So she had this huge expanse of history. And she was a lesbian. I think she started out not identifying as a lesbian, but ended up
Mm,
identifying. Anyway, she was with a woman for 45 years and they lived
wow.
partly in Helsinki. And then they also had this place where they went in the summer, this little house on a very isolated island. So if you look on Instagram, there's this account that I think is called something like Tove Jansson Official. And they just posted this video of her from the early 70s where she's holding her black cat. And I have a black cat. And she's like dancing with the cat and just in the most silly, joyous way.
Mm,
And she was just really cool. Like she was queer in, I think, from like at least the 50s on, if
yeah.
not earlier. And she also did like political cartoons critiquing Hitler, and then these beautiful kids' books and beautiful adult books. And I just think she'd be so weird and fun to hang out with. And just, I have all these questions I want to ask her about the world she created. Yeah.
I love that. What a good answer.
I was really proud of it. Yeah, no, seriously. And then I was like, oh, I'm so sad she's dead because I do want to have tea with her.
I know. What is with the being drawn to like sad things for your art?
No, it's my life. I don't know.
My
Like,
life is tragic. What can I
my
tell
life
you?
is so hard. I don't know. I think, I don't know.
Emotional things make good art. And if these are things that are happening in your life that are worth exploring through art, then that's what they are.
Yeah, it's funny because in between my two memoirs about sad things happening to me, I wrote a fictional comic about a murderess, which I guess is also
A
like,
serial killer.
yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I have a problem. I probably have
No.
multiple problems. But I think for me too, this most recent book, it is sad, but it's also there's joy in it. Like
Sure.
there was joy in finding this way of making art and in sharing my love for Dynamo with other people. And
Yeah.
we had the book launch this last week, and it was just there's a lot of laughing and remembering her and joy and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see what I do next.
Listen, I think a lot of art comes out of wounds, right? Good or bad or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
And honestly, things that are funny or happy can come out of wounds that are sad and heartbreaking.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think I'm really just giving you a hard time. Sarah Leavitt, so excited for your book, Something Not Nothing. Congratulations. Everyone, check it out. Where can people find you? Now's a good time.
Instagram is still where I'm hanging out. It's like the best place to find me.
We'll tag you.
I'm working on other art projects. I worked on the script for a feature length animation based on my first book, and so I'm still a little bit involved in that. Like it's mostly in other people's hands now, but that's another project in my world. And teaching.
When can we expect to experience that? Do we know?
We're hoping to experience it in 2026. Yeah, beginning of 2026.
Cool.
So not too long from now. Yeah.
No, not too long from now. And teaching.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Sarah, it's so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.